So, Gretchen, thank you.
Thanks, Norman. I'm actually going to start with a more general overview of some of the work we have going on at our major stations that show a little bit more of how the private sector is actually sort of helping Amtrak meet some of its long-term revenue goals, and then we'll focus a little bit at the end on Union Station. Slide please. Just a quick, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Amtrak, but we are we operate the national rail network. We have over 500 destinations in 46 states. This map shows a sort of our general routes. We have 3 service types: the Northeast Corridor, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that goes from here all the way up to Boston. We also have long distance routes, 15 lines that go throughout the country, and then we have 18 states contribute to our state-sponsored, state-supported services. A lot of those in the Midwest radiating out of Chicago. Amtrak has been enjoying tremendous growth and success within the last few years, over the last decade or so. For the 6th straight year, we exceeded 30 million passengers, and that is almost doubling our growth since 1998. In FY16, we earned approximately $3.2 billion in operating revenue, which covered about, $3.2 billion in revenue, which covered about 94% of our operating revenue. A lot of our capital does come from the federal government, and so that's where Amtrak's really trying to see if we can drive more growth to the company, financial growth to the company, in order to support our capital programs and to support the state of good repair work that needs to happen. Next slide. So to do this, we looked at sort of our nationwide assets, portfolio assets, and you'll see that we own and operate over 2 million square feet of mixed-use station properties. We have over 6 million square feet of maintenance facilities and ancillary infrastructure. We occupy about 1 million square feet of office space. Some of that is owned and some of that is leased. But all of this provides us with an incredible opportunity to reevaluate and look at how our assets can help drive value to the company. Next slide. So in 2013, the Amtrak Board of Directors looked to the company and looked to my department to try to create and look for a more coordinated approach as to how we could unlock the commercial value and potential of our assets. For so long, Amtrak had been focused on running the railroad, which is obviously a strong goal of our companies, but we really didn't look at what our assets could mean in terms of potential growth and potential revenue for the company. So we started to look at approach for the value realization, either direct or indirectly, from our major assets. And so the 4 goals of our program are listed up there. Identify new revenue sources, attract private sector investment to help fund Amtrak's long-term capital plan, execute customer improvements and economic development partnerships and opportunities, and then be able to reinvest new revenue back into the company. The study initially focused on our major stations. We'll talk a little bit about the 5 we focused on, but we looked at following the emerging demographic trends of transit-oriented development, of millennials wanting to be in the city, and of prime market conditions right now to try to capitalize on that for the company. Next slide. So we looked at 4 of our top major stations, and then Baltimore, which is our 8th busiest station. 4 of these are along the Northeast Corridor, and then Chicago serves as a great opportunity for us in the Midwest. So we looked at New York Penn Station / Moynihan, Philadelphia, Baltimore, as I mentioned, and then Washington Union Station. And the approach utilized for this work is consistent with the emerging trend across, sort of globally, across infrastructure owners and agencies to try to seek to leverage our portfolio of assets in a holistic way to drive value back into the company. We really looked at Transport for London, which has a program called Property Partnerships, and where they've been successful in this same type of endeavor to unlock their capital value, their untapped capital value, to bring value back to the company. So the The study that we did in 2013 identified close to $300 million worth of potential land value capture that could come back to the company through some of our initiatives. And so quickly, I'll just touch upon the 5 major stations and sort of what we have, next slide, what we have going on there and how we're trying to partner with the private sector to achieve some of our long-term goals with the revenue generation. So Chicago Union Station is our 4th busiest station. We own the building. There's considerable air rights associated with the building and the yard and our infrastructure there. We own a parking garage immediately adjacent, and we own some adjacent properties, about 14 acres in total. Chicago Union Station, as all of the stations we'll talk about, are it's very historic. Our stations on the Northeast Corridor are all mostly Daniel Burnham buildings. So we're lucky to be we're lucky to have such jewels of stations that also sit in prime locations. So in Chicago, the station sits pretty much in between the West Loop area, which over the last 20 years or so has undergone a tremendous amount of growth. It's a popular dining residential area. A lot of new offices are relocating there. And then just to the other side of us, we have the downtown loop area itself. So we're well positioned there in Chicago to take advantage of that. And Chicago, as we'll talk about with some of the other stations, we're starting a master development process there. We hope to have a master developer on board, I would say, within the next few months. And that'll be our first station to sort of get going with that. And really the master developer is going to be a partner with Amtrak to help us, one, create the vision for the redevelopment of the station, but also to help really drive and fund a lot of that. Amtrak will retain all of the railroad infrastructure, maintenance, and operations, but the private developer and the team of development will really be responsible for the commercial, retail, and real estate opportunities that the station presents with itself. And while we're talking about private investment here, with all of our stations, there's a huge public component as well. So in Chicago, for example, we're actually not the #1 user of our station. It's the commuter agency, which is Metro out there. So they are obviously a huge partner in our redevelopment project, as is the City Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation, and also the Regional Transit Authority in Chicago. Next slide. So New York City. New York City is a little complicated because, as you can see by the map, all of those different colors represent different property owners. So Amtrak does own the tracks, platforms, and passenger infrastructure at Penn Station, but a lot of the sort of at grade and above development opportunities and development itself are owned by either Madison Square Garden Company, Vornado, or some other private developers. But obviously there's still a tremendous amount of potential for Amtrak to create a partnership there with a developer, as well as working with all of our other agencies, New Jersey Transit, Long Island Railroad, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. All of these agencies are working together to, one, create the vision, and two, help execute the vision for Penn Station. And I should also note Moynihan, which is the large yellow box up there, where Amtrak will be sort of relocating our main operations functions to within the next few years. The next slide is Philadelphia. 30th Street Station sits sort of in between what's called University City and then Center City. Philadelphia has experienced, I would say, one of the largest city population growth within the last decade or so. I believe that it's the millennial population is growing faster in Philadelphia than in any other U.S. city currently. And its downtown is second to New York and Chicago in terms of population. So again, here we own the station, the air rights, and adjacent parcels, about 63 acres of land. SEPTA, which is the commuter rail operating out of Pennsylvania, operating out of Philadelphia to both New Jersey and Pennsylvania, owns about 25 acres immediately adjacent to us. In 2016, Amtrak, along with several of our partners, released the 30th Street Station District Plan, and this sort of provided the vision for a vibrant redevelopment of not only the Amtrak-owned property, but how we could work with all of the adjacent landowners, including Drexel, which is immediately to the west of us, to spur redevelopment and growth within. It's sort of, I would say, 30th sits in almost the whole of the donut in Philadelphia right now between the two major urban centers that I mentioned. Our first development opportunity coming out of the 30th Street Plan is to develop what is known as Parcel 1. It sits immediately to the west of our station and provides a great opportunity for a developer to build a mixed-use, transit-oriented development right there. There's currently, I believe we're currently seeking and in the works of receiving proposals from developers. It is our goal that also towards the end of this year, we will be releasing the same type of master developer call for proposals that we are in Chicago for Philadelphia as well. The next slide. Baltimore Penn Station is our fourth major station that sits within this portfolio of development potential. Here again, we're pursuing a master development just as we are in Chicago and will be in Philadelphia. We're in the process of that right now, and we hope to have our developer on board by the end of this year. And here again, Amtrak owns the station building, many surrounding parcels with tremendous potential for overbuild development, and then we own quite a bit of associated air rights. And then finally, next slide please, Washington Union Station, which is actually, I project manage the master plan for Union Station, so this is the one I can most speak about, and I could go on for quite a while about. But it's really unique in that while there is a tremendous amount of work going behind it, and we get a lot of press, and we have a lot of great pictures, it's not necessarily a public-private partnership as we're pursuing at our other stations yet. There is a developer on board who bought the air rights from Congress in 2006. The sale of those air rights went back to Congress, so Amtrak didn't receive the revenue from that, which it surprises many people when they ask sort of, how is the private developer involved, and the money coming back to the company from that. So really, we work with our air rights developer right now sort of on a coordinated approach. In 2012, we released jointly with the developer, Ackridge, it's a local DC development company. We released a 2012 master plan which set forth the vision for the redevelopment of the station. They have about 3 million square feet of mixed-use development planned for above the tracks and platforms in Union Station. And so that's all the hatching that you see above the red up there. Amtrak owns all of the red, and we recently acquired a building that is sort of the notch out on the right side of the map, and associated air rights with that building. The building itself is owned by DOT, and it's operated on behalf of DOT by what's called the Union Station Redevelopment Corporation. And then we have many other stakeholders involved, I would say. The front of the station is owned by National Park Service. The purple strip that you see running through the middle is, it's called the Hopscotch Bridge. It's owned by the the District Department of Transportation, and needs to be rebuilt as part of this project, and also just as a state of good repair project. So we currently have very little private investment coming into this project. We have a near-term program, concourse modernization program, that is going to double the capacity of our passenger waiting areas. I'm sure if any of you took the train here or are taking the train home, you will unfortunately probably experience a long queue that circles around. You'll experience some overcrowding, especially if it's around peak periods. And so this project is aimed to alleviate a lot of that congestion, create a better environment for all of our passengers, and allow for the future growth along the Northeast Corridor that's expected within the next 5 years. So that project is being funded through federal dollars, and as well as we have quite a few projects, rail-related projects that need to happen within the next 5 years as well. Concurrently, though, the big project that everyone knows about, the master plan, which have the wonderful pictures on the left-hand side, that's in the environmental review process. We started that process about 1.5 years ago, and we have about 1.5 years to 2 years to go. So when we, everyone today has talked about the arduous environmental review process that slows down a lot of projects. I think the Washington project can certainly attest to that. Our schedule has been lengthened considerably because of the environmental review process, and it has a major impact on the developer and when the developer will be able to start their project, as we need to coordinate the construction of the two projects. So with that, I think last slide, it's a general overview of Union Station. And then just to wrap up, some of the challenges and opportunities that Amtrak has in terms of our revenue growth potential. As I mentioned, our stations sort of sit in ideal locations within the cities for us to capitalize on transit-oriented development and really create stations that don't just function as for the railroad operations, but also can serve as sort of a beacon in the city and of, it says here, the living rooms of the communities we serve. Obviously, the timing is right for Amtrak and others to capitalize on this. We've been experiencing, like I said, record growth over the last few years. The public and the private investors, are ready to invest and to create wonderful new developments. And really, Amtrak needs to do stuff like this in order to fund future growth and fund our capital program. We have a tremendous amount of state of good repair backlog that isn't going to be able to fund itself. So by partnering with the private sector, we are able to hopefully plug up some of those holes and create more value for the company. And then, as I've mentioned, it's not just private investment. All of these stations have quite a few public partners, local and state partners. Federal government is obviously involved in almost everything we do. And so there's continued need to support and coordinate with them as well as we move forward with all of these station projects. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Gretchen. I think Carlos was scared of my questions, so he left. Carlos had a meeting at DOT. They're at the very final stages of getting their approvals. Gretchen, just to talk a little bit about, and then we'll have some questions from the audience, but just to talk a little bit about land value capture, what's the total size? You said is something like $300 million, right? Is that what you see? Or, it seems to me it could be larger. It also seems to me that if Vornado owns a big part of Penn Station, you should just get Steve Roth to give it to you because he's part of the President's Infrastructure Commission.
Well, I'll let you mention that to Steve. So 300 was sort of, we've caveated that number quite a bit. Obviously, if we took into, I should say it also, while we looked at Gateway and all of the needs for Gateway in the study that we did, there's a lot of acquisition that's involved with the Gateway project. And if we sort of tacked on the potential for development above acquired properties for Gateway, if we really took a hard look at New York, if we factored in the value of all of our stations, we're looking more at it was above $2 billion. So this $300 million was really just the strict value capture number, not based on the mega project, and also not based on any of the cost of what we currently own, what we could sell. It was really retaining everything we had and then creating value from that.
Now that's interesting. We did a project for the World Economic Forum, a study And it's just a tremendous strategy in terms of value capture that's very little used in the U.S. for transit projects, and seems to me that's why I wanted to highlight those projects. So that was fantastic. Any questions for Gretchen? Because I think she owns a lot of work.
Gretchen, my name is Carl Atkinson. I'm with Voith Hydro in York, Pennsylvania. Slightly different industry, of course. We deal with hydroelectric power plants for dams. But I see a parallel in the modernization work that you're doing in your stations and your land capture strategy here. The infrastructure for hydro also is modernizing across the United States. And my question is more about if this infrastructure program or stimulus goes forward, and there is an influx of money, whether it's public, private, government, whatever the case may be, are the agencies that are owning and operating these facilities prepared to take that money and actually make constructive use out of it in the very near term? If you see a $10 billion influx, for example, from this kind of infrastructure program, are the projects ready to go, or are they going to be bottlenecked in the regulatory processes that you talked about, other permitting and planning and coordination with all of the other stakeholders that are involved? Where will the money go, actually?
I think Amtrak would welcome $10 billion in our pockets. I think you're right that nothing is shovel ready per se, in the fact that you do have to go through the permitting process, the regulatory process. A lot of our stuff is historic, so you have to go through the historic impact process. However, I do think that Amtrak, and I think many other of the infrastructure companies are readying themselves, are doing the design and doing some of the legwork now to prepare ourselves for the potential that we could receive, money. There's a whole slew of state of good repair programs that Amtrak has that we're starting to prioritize and look at, and as part of that is making sure that we're prepared, that should the money be there, we're ready to act on it. And so there's obviously always going to be, until all of the rules and regulations change, there's always going to be some delay in seeing your projects go to execution from the time you get the money. But I think that Amtrak and everyone are trying to get a little bit smarter about that and get a little bit prepared. In terms of the station projects, we've learned a tremendous amount from the Washington Union Station project. Some of the pitfalls we've experienced in terms of just our environmental impact statement process, and the delays we've experienced on the project, and how to work smarter with Federal Railroad Administration. We're going to be undertaking all of these processes at all of our stations. We're also doing it not just at our stations, but we have bridge and tunnel projects along the Northeast Corridor that are also going through the environmental review process. And I think that because Amtrak is undergoing, quite a handful of environmental processes right now, we're getting smarter and we're being able to refine that a little bit more. And I think that'll help us in the year or two, or whenever it is that we're able to actually see some dollars flow back into the company.
That's great. If it's okay, I think we'll move on to the next panel, because we're a little bit behind schedule. But Gretchen, that was fantastic, and I assume you're going to be here for a bit longer, and your CEO is going to be here over lunch as well.
He can answer any question.
But the interesting fact for me, sort of my takeaway in listening to Gretchen, is that there's a big space between $300 million and $2 billion. And what the guy from the White House said over dinner last night is that it's unlimited, the opportunities for private investment in infrastructure once we get organized, and that's, I think, a big theme here. Yeah, so thank you very much, Gretchen. That was great.